believe that it's going to be a better decision than I would individually make. That's believability-weighted decision making. And it's fantastic when you have independent thinkers. In order to be successful in the markets or as an entrepreneur, one has to be an independent thinker that makes decisions better than the consensus decisions.
It's fair.
In the markets, the consensus is built into the price.
It's beta.
Yeah. So now you have to bet against the consensus to make money. Therefore, you have to be an independent thinker. The best dynamic is to have a bunch of independent thinkers. Now you've got a bunch of independent thinkers. How are they going to have thoughtful disagreement and get past those disagreements? How we have done that is the key to our success, and it's outlined in the book.
Even management gurus who would applaud many of the principles and many of the practices that you advocate and that you explain articulately would also say that the whole construct is kind of utopian, if you will. Has it felt to you in the process of building Bridgewater and all of these things that make it what it is, has it felt anything like a social experiment, or has it felt different?
It's eminently practical, right? If it's otherwise, the results show it, right? It's the reason for the success that I've had or the Bridgewater's had, right? I mean, we got 40 years of looking at this thing. So this is not utopian, this is realistic, right? But I would like, that's why I wrote the book. People can read the bits and pieces. You read them one by one, and you could say, does that piece make sense? Isn't it sensible to have an idea meritocracy where the best ideas win out? Okay, now, what are the rules of the game to achieve that?
That's what it's
Isn't
all
that
about.
better?
Well, if you want to get to the idea of meritocracy, you've got to have a way of getting there.
Right. If you want to get to the best answer, it's not going to be in your head. I think one of the greatest tragedies of mankind is that people stubbornly have wrong opinions in their head that they could easily stress test and get to better opinions collectively if they could be forthright with each other and go through the processes I outline in the book. And the reason, and they have to have humility. I learned the fear of being wrong. I'm fearful of being wrong. And it's because of that that I need those independent decision makers. So I think it's a very practical, it's not utopian, it's practical.
Much of the book and much of what you describe now is an implicit and occasionally explicit critique of traditional management and traditional leadership. Tell me what's wrong with the way most companies are run.
It's dishonest. It's dysfunctional. I mean, dishonest meaning you don't know what that guy's really thinking. It all goes on behind the doors. And everybody's doing their politics. Okay? So that's not an environment that encourages the ownership, the straightforwardness. Dysfunctional? When people don't know what other people are really thinking? It seems to me like what is crazy and what's normal, right? Is it crazy to be radically truthful and radically transparent with each other, to say what you mean, to work it through and to know that there's none of that games playing? Isn't it more efficient? And isn't it more straightforward? Why? It's a psychological barrier. Most people have a psychological barrier. Psychologists and neuroscientists tell me that it's because of how the brain is wired. That there's a part of our brain called the amygdala. Mm-hmm. And when we have a disagreement, there's an inclination to think that that's a fight rather than a curiosity. Okay? And so that tends to cause it. And it's also how we're raised. You know, from a very early age, the whole idea of being right is so rewarded, whereas learning from mistakes doesn't have its place, right? So a kid studies, you're smart, you take the examination, and okay, you do badly, but life's not like that. Life is mostly a matter of making your mistakes and knowing how to evolve past those mistakes and learn. So when I look at a traditional company, it doesn't value that learning process, that mistake base, talking about what people are really like. Nobody talks about what people are really like. Why not?
Good question. Why not?
Don't
Is it because human nature explains the why not? The amygdala?
I think it's a combination of, psychologists tell me, that it's a combination of some amount of programming, the amygdala, and some amount of the environmental, the education system, how we're growing
The
up.
society we live in.
Right. We know subliminally that the greatest people are the people who make mistakes, learn from them, and grow and evolve, right? And I've had the opportunity to get to know the most remarkable, successful people in the world. And they have all gone through the mistake making and the learning from that. It's the learning that comes from mistakes that makes people more successful than knowing the right answers. And yet we have those kinds of barriers. So the key to our success has been, I don't mean to lecture, but I do mean to pass along what has been the keys of our success.
Ray Dalio says all great leaders make mistakes. What sets them apart is how they learn from those mistakes. Dalio wishes they'd all write those lessons down. Principles is his way of sharing the ones he learned while building Bridgewater.
So who's on your list of good leaders then?
Bill Gates is a great, Elon Musk, there are shapers, Jack Dorsey, Reed Hastings, in some of the business community, in the philanthropic. Somebody I admire enormous is Mohammed Yunus, microfinance, and has found really the inventor of social enterprise, and he knows how to make essentially businesses out of philanthropy. In other words, to make them self-sustaining. Fantastic. Jeffrey Canada, Harlem Children's Zone. In other words, a vision. These are visionaries who are shapers. They're just, and those are contemporary. Those are. It's very difficult in government.
Well, you spent a lot of time with Mario Draghi. Would you put him on that list?
Oh, I'd put Mario Draghi on that list. I would say Ben Bernanke is a hero. Okay. In other words, the person who stood up and at a very difficult time with a sacrifice, personal sacrifice, to do the right things. The political system has its challenges.
It sounds to me like the unifying threads among all of these people whom you do admire are, on the one hand, independent thinking and creativity, and on the other hand, the courage to pursue either one or both of those things.
I mean, everybody has their role. That's the thing I've also learned. That everybody has their own nature and the role, and it takes a team. And so, yes, I like the fact that those people, for the good of whatever, can go from visualizing something, visualization to actualization, to build it out. However, I could tell you that all of those people all need people who have different natures and different abilities. The big conceptual, big picture thinker needs a person who's paying attention to all the detail. The creative person who's not reliable needs the reliable person who's not creative.
Have any companies earned your admiration?
Other psychologists who've come in and examined it, our company, say that there are comparisons. I would say that Netflix with Reed Hastings has earned my admiration. Jack Dorsey and Twitter, in terms of that radical transparency and the idea of meritocracy, has earned my admiration. So there are some, but I'm not an expert on it.
You were, Ray, among the first people to computerize, if you will, systematize, computerize the investment process, right? To turn your ideas, your principles, into algorithms and put them to work in financial markets. I don't know of anybody who has tried to computerize the management process the way that you have. Why do you think it is that Ray Dalio, in that respect, is out there on his own?
I think it's going to happen. I think I learned at a very, many years ago, that almost anything that I think, I can computerize the criteria for making decisions. By the way, that would be one of the greatest gifts I can give people, is the understanding of when you're thinking, I'm making a decision. Now slow up and think, what are the criteria? Write those criteria down. You can put those criteria into equations, because the brain is 89 billion neurons, which are little computers, and then it gets input from the outside. Well, what your brain is doing, can in many ways be done better by the computer if you go through that exercise. So I learned that almost any decision making could be computerized. So now, whenever I'm dealing with people, I realized that could be put into algorithms. Okay, now imagine the power of that. Just like in the investment, because it knows all of that information. It knows what all those people are like. It knows what's happening. And when it has all that power of all of that information, and it has those types of criteria, it can bring to you all of that. And it makes that decision in the same way our investment can be making decisions. So right now, it's working like a GPS works in parallel. And I think that's, by the way, the best. When you have the computer making the decision like a GPS makes a decision, and you're making a decision in parallel, those two things line up and you make better decisions. And
all companies eventually will do this kind of thing.
Yeah.
And people too?
Yeah. I think that you're not far from being able to go to your smartphone, and just like you call in Google and you say, what's the facts? And you get your facts like this, that you'll be able to call in and get your advice. Idea meritocratic decision making by experts. You see, two things are coming together at the same time, and that is radical transparency and algorithmic decision making. Okay, radical transparency means that almost anybody can know almost everything about you, maybe more than your wife knows about you, because you're leaving this data, these fingerprints all over the place. So the data on you gives you a profile so that the computer knows you, okay? You take that data and you put it together with algorithms, and those algorithms are going to say, how do I deal with him in a way that's better, more tailored to you than the human could? That's where we are, right?
Is the outcome inevitably good? Because if you think about it, the outcome of a system like that, particularly put to bad use, could be frightening.
Well, it's like most things. It has good and bad sides to it. But I think that, like we found it miraculous because you certainly can make better decisions. You can make those decisions idea meritocratically if everybody's involved in making those algorithms. In other words, like I wrote the principles in the book, you could write an algorithm. And since everybody agrees on the algorithm, they agree on the decision-making criteria.
So you think it has applicability. Right now, the machine you've built works for a 1,500-person, privately owned company. How applicable is it to other organizations? Is it applicable to other companies? Maybe not in its exact form, but something similar to it? Larger companies? Is it applicable to governments?
Let's first make clear what the it is. I think it's the broad category of, do you have an idea meritocracy? If that's the it that you're talking about.
Well, there are two its.
Okay.
Idea meritocracy on the one hand, and a systematic way of supporting it on the other.
Yeah. First of all, you have to want the first.
I mean, as an ideal, everyone should be able to embrace, right, an idea meritocracy.